What I want to do first is just to kind of review what we've talked about in the month of August, just to kind of give you a sense and feel of leading to where we are today. So August, the theme was pause for guidance. And the first week we talked about the pause. We used pause as an acronym, right? Pause being preparation, appreciating and abiding in the pause. The U representing understanding. When you pause, understanding is revealed. The S representing surrendering to the stillness. And the E representing effortless evolving. Then week 2, Reverend Elizabeth asked us to take time to tune in. And she asked us to consider some questions for that week when we are talking about pausing. She asked us to stop and think and ask ourselves, how am I breathing? What is it that I'm thinking about? So to actually stop and think about what you're thinking about, right? She then asked us to become aware of what's happening within ourselves. And then she gave us the beautiful quote, which I have now fallen in love with, which is, the song of eternity dwells within each and every one of us. I so love that quote, Reverend Elizabeth. Thank you so much. So the third week, we talked about sparking imagination. And I used the metaphor of a spark plug. And the spark plug actually is what ignites the air and the fuel in our engine, which creates an explosion, which allows the engine to produce power. And I related that to our lives about how important it is for us to connect with the divine, the air, and us being matter, the fuel, and how important that mixture is in order for us to create the powerful life that we all desire to live. Then last week, Sherry talked about the GPS, the God positioning system. And she shared with us that it's important for us to stop the silence, right? Stop being, the S being silence, the time, taking the time, and the opportunity to be present, the presence of the divine, to take that opportunity, because the divine spirit within us whispers. So knowing that how important it is for us to get the GPS, and it is important for us to position ourselves to be in the silence, to hear the divine. And then she shared with us another one that I love called HALT. Hope, acceptance, love, and tolerance. So when we know that we have positioned ourselves to allow the divine to be that spark plug, for us to be the spark plug, then now we are ready to rise and reemerge, which is this week's talk. So this week's talk about rise and reemerge, I said, when I hear the word rise, the first thing that comes to my mind is sunrise. And sunrise is one of my favorite times. Since I moved here to Jacksonville, it has been the joy for me to get up early in the morning, go to the ocean, and have a sunrise meditation. It is my pleasure. It is my joy. It's one of the reasons why I actually moved here. So when I think about rise, that's the first image that comes to my mind. So that's an advantage for us here living on First Coast, right? So now let's think about the word rise for a minute. When you think about rise, that means that there is a movement, a change in the position from a lower to a higher, right? There's a quote by Brene Brown, and she says, rising strong changes not just you, but also the people around you. The rise. So then, I had to think about rising, because earlier in this year, I had to have a hip replacement. And rising was not so easy. So in order for me to rise, I had to have some tools to rise. I needed some assistance to rise from the sitting position to get up, right? So now let's stop and think about that from a spiritual perspective. Sometimes we can get caught up in the day-to-day, the murk and all of this stuff, and we know we need to rise from our human eyes to our spiritual eyes. So we have to rise as it relates to what it is that we're thinking about and focusing on, right? That's the rise. So now when I had hip surgery, I had started out, I had a walker. Now, and I really didn't want to do a walker because I'm not an old lady and I don't want to be seen as an old lady. So having to use that walker was really something I didn't want to do, right? But it was a tool to help me rise from that lower position. So when we stop and think about our day-to-day life and how opportunities, when we are dealing with some of those human experiences, and we need to rise out of it, we need to step out of the murk and the mirror, right? So we need to use our spiritual tools, like I had to use my walker to stand up, to rise. It was just a temporary thing. I didn't have to stay in that position, but I knew that I needed some support for me to get up off that sofa to go and walk. So when we talk about rising, it is important, once again, to go back thinking about what Sherry mentioned last week, the GPS, right? The GPS is the God positioning system, right? So we have to stop and think about, if I'm trying to get up and, and I know my hip is not going to let me get up by myself my normal way, I've got to use my tools, right? I've got to use my walker to get up, to get out of that particular thing. So that means I have to do some maneuvering. But in order to do that, I got to know where I am. So I have to be aware of where I am so that I can now maneuver to rise out of that particular position. So when we talk about rising, we're talking about being self-aware. We know that we have our higher self as well as this human experience. And so we have to become aware when we're having these human experiences and we get caught looking at it from the human eyes, that we have to reposition ourselves. We've got to use our GPS, right? That God positioning system. We've got to use that walker to rise up out of what is actually happening. So the first thing we have to do is to become aware. Because if we stay stuck in this human place, which is where our ego, I know you've all heard this one before, the ego wants us to stay using our human eyes, because the ego wants to only allow us to stay right here and right now. This human experience is supposed to be the only reality. And that's what the ego wants to tell us, is that the ego, this human experience, is the only reality. But we know better. And we have to remember, we have to remind ourselves to use our tools so that we are then able to move on up. Okay, now this brings up, I'm from the day, back in the day, the Jeffersons. Y'all heard the Jeffersons. Well, we're moving on up. Y'all heard that one, right? Right? Y'all heard that before? Okay. So anyway, so the Jeffersons said moving on up to the east side. So I want to suggest that instead of us moving on up to the east side from the human perspective, that we move on up to the east side when the sun is rising. because the sun is rising in the east. And then we remember each and every day I get to try it again at sunrise. So that is what is so cool. When I become aware, I can then align myself so that I am seeing from God's eyes versus our human eyes. And when I'm able to see from God's eyes, then I know each and every sunrise, I get to re-emerge. Because now when I am seeing from God's eyes, the merger of the human and the divine, I'm aware of my opportunity each and every day to re-emerge so that I can be that spiritual being each and every day. And I get that opportunity when the sun rises in the east and we moving on up, So when we think about each new day and how we can use our spiritual tools to be able to rise above the day-to-day stuff that might be going on, we can use another acronym called RISE. When we talk about RISE, we're talking about the opportunity to restore our souls. So starting with the R, restore our souls. So how do we do that? We use our spiritual tools. Every day at sunrise, I get to restore my soul. The I represents integrate. It is important for me to integrate these spiritual principles in our daily lives because the merger happens, the integration happens for us to be able to merge our spiritual selves with our human selves so that the oneness of the divine shows up each and every day. I get to re-emerge with my divine self. Okay, so we're moving on to the S. And the S allows us to be self-aware, to intentionally choose to re-emerge each and every day. When the sun rises in the east, we can move on up to the east side, right? And the E, I'm going back to my effortlessly evolving. When I am effortlessly evolving, I'm standing in the truth, the spiritual truth. And when I stand in the spiritual truth, my belief really now is a knowing. And the knowing is because I've used my spiritual tools. I know what I know. I know that I am a divine being. I am love. I am joy. I am peace. And I walk and stand in that no matter what's going on around me. Even in this stuff that we're experiencing right now, I stand in the knowingness that God's got me. No matter what's going on, God's got me. That's my favorite three words whenever stuff come up. God's got me. I might be feeling crazy inside, but God's got me. I'm in the knowing that it's unfolding perfectly. I am believing and now knowing that the God that I serve is right there with me. And I know it. And I know it because I've tested the principles. And that's one thing about this teaching, is that you have the opportunity to prove it to yourself by using the spiritual tools, acknowledging that your divine self, when you have re-emerged, there is a knowing that is all unfolding for my highest and my best. And that's what this teaching really is all about. It allows you to prove it so that you know it. It's not just a belief. It is a knowing within you. So it is the one thing that I truly appreciate about this teaching is I've proven it for myself. I have stepped out on faith many a time, didn't know the how. I was like, okay, God's got me. I'm getting ready to go step out here on this ledge. I know God's got me. I know God's got me. And sure enough, it didn't turn out exactly the way I had hoped, but it was God's got me, right? So what I want you to acknowledge with me is the operation of knowing that each and every day that we have the opportunity to restore and nourish our soul. We have the opportunity to remember to integrate our spiritual selves with our human selves. And this allows us to intentionally choose for the highest and best so that we can effortlessly evolve. True. When I know what I know, I have reemerged from belief to a knowing. And then I know I have risen. I have risen and I have the opportunity to re-emerge each and every day.